All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Beyond Seven Figures podcast. So, with me today are two of the most brilliant thought partners that I have in my network. Their unique abilities expand wide and far, but on today's conversation, we're largely going to be talking about authentic messaging, and we're also going to touch on AI, as AI is a critical component of competing tomorrow. Not necessarily today, because there's still very few people who are using it, but the people who are using AI today are already getting an advantage. So we're going to talk about how you can use it today. But before long, it's going to become not an optional tool if you want to compete. It's going to become mandatory. And we'll touch upon why that is. And I know that can be a little controversial for some. There's going to be a lot of skeptics out there that are saying, I don't know if that's going to be true, but maybe by the end, we will have changed your mind. So, welcome to the show, Amy Yamada and Ken Droz. Droz. I can't like. How do you pronounce your last
Mm,
name, by the way?
So funny. Only one person has ever pronounced it right in my entire life. It's Dro. The Z is silent. So
Dro. So, all right. So, what nationality is that?
French Swiss,
Wow. Man, they just throw the Z in there to really kind of throw you for a loop.
like rendezvous, silent Z. You don't see it often, but it's out there.
Got it. Cool. All right. So, let's just start right off the bat with that authentic messaging. Amy, I was looking at your background and I happened to notice that you had quite an extensive background in radio. You worked for Clear Channel, which is, a big 800-pound gorilla. Before that, you worked for, some smaller radio stations. It was all on radio and online advertising and whatnot. While that's still effective, I think people underestimate the level of difficulty of radio advertising because when you're delivering a message over the radio, more people than not are listening to the radio while they're in the car. And it's not like they're going to take action immediately while they are driving the car. But the message has to be so strong and so impactful that it has to move the needle when they're outside of the vehicle. And I imagine that your experience with radio advertising has influenced what you're doing now with your clients and creating these authentic messages. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, gosh, you're taking me way back. I mean, it's been a while since I was in that world. I was in that world for about 15 years and then shifted into entrepreneurship about 12 years ago. But definitely when I look back now, I think about how with these ads and sponsorships and promotional mentions, you would have just a short amount of time for the radio station to either run your ad or for a DJ to talk about what it was that you were sponsoring. And those messages were so short, and the thing that was so important with those messages is that it had to speak to the audience and it had to be consistent and they needed to hear it frequently. So it's interesting that you asked me that. I'm like, oh, that takes me back in the day of the radio days. And it has definitely influenced how I think about messaging, how I think about how we as businesses connect with our audiences and how important it is for that message to land so quickly and frequently and consistently. So yeah, thanks for bringing up my back in the day stories for sure.
Well, you figure if you can make advertising work, then you would imagine if you can make advertising work, online advertising and website messaging and whatnot, that should be easy, right? Because it's a shorter distance between making a decision. We're sitting at the computer or we're on our cell phone, we can make a decision right there. But if you're driving a car, you're not going to make a decision in that moment, or at least you shouldn't in that moment. You're going to have to remember to do that the next time you stop. Or maybe you're not advertising for the sake of trying to drive a decision. We know that consumption drives conversion. So maybe you're advertising for the sake of expanding brand recall. So, in that moment of truth, when the decision has to be made, that the brand comes top of mind or it influences and maybe an omni-channel online click. So I don't know if you guys want to speak to that because I know I kind of went down a little bit of a rabbit hole, but I do think that's important.
It's funny because Ken and I have had recent conversations about how it's both knowing who your ideal client is, and then it's also about knowing about the ideal moment of them making a decision. So you're absolutely right. It's about having that consistent message going out to your ideal client so that you do become top of mind for when they are ready to buy. And then they know exactly what to do when they are ready to buy. So all of that matters when it comes to authentic messaging, marketing, ideal clients, like really building that deep connection with your ideal client or customer. And then that way, when they are at that moment of decision, you're not just starting your marketing then, you're already made an impression in their mind of you are the go-to person for exactly what they need. So it's pretty powerful.
People think of the traditional marketing funnel, top, middle, bottom funnel, and they think of that as almost like new and modern because a lot of marketers continue to talk about that and preach on the traditional funnel and so forth. And I get it. There's a function for that. Where people often get confused is that funnel was originally created in the late 1800s and only modified and updated in 1924. But, back in the day, your source of advertising was you'd get a newspaper and you'd read the newspaper. You'd say, oh, wow, this is great. There may be like three or four competitors. This is great. You have to walk to your desk, grab your checkbook or write out a check, put it in the envelope, walk down to the mailbox, stick it in the mail. And so there was a certain level of difficulty, but it was more of a straight line. Now, fast forward, I think it was 2019. People looked at 17 different sources of information before making a buying decision. Now it's upwards of, depending on the research you're looking at, 27 to 36 different sources of information before making a buying decision. So they go through the cycle of exploration and evaluation, and it's really messy. And so I'm not going to make a decision the moment I decide, hey, I need a widget. I'm not going to go ahead and I'm not going to make a decision right now. I'm going to have to do my research. I'm going to look at you. I'm going to look at the competition. Then I'm going to say, well, maybe I don't need a widget. Maybe I need something else instead. So I'm going to look at all the alternatives. Then I'm going to sit back for a little bit and then try to convince myself why I should buy it versus do nothing at all. So it's like all this like messy conversation that goes on. So if you just think you're going to take out one ad, whether it is on the radio or it's online or send out one email or whatever that might be and get a buyer, you do not understand today's buyer at all, right?
Yeah.
So then, with that being said, how do our listeners right now sort of make sure that they are present in that moment when somebody has to make a decision?
We've been talking about this ideal moment concept a lot in the last few days. And what people are purchasing is a moment. Like what it is that they want is either for a moment to end or a moment to begin. And I think
Mm,
often we're thinking about this product or a person as being a thing that gives them some sort of awareness, but it doesn't really ever take hold until we seize that moment for them of either starting or ending something. And our messaging needs to really speak to that of what moment is it that they're trying to initiate or conclude, and how can we help them make that transition?
that's a good point, actually, right? Because I just went through this the other day. It's like I was talking with somebody who needed a chiropractor, and they had been talking about it for a long time, but it wasn't their moment. But then they woke up with their head pinned to their shoulder, and that became their moment, right? Because the pain was big enough. But it doesn't matter if you're going to hire a business coach or a marketing agency or a manufacturing company or whatever it is. It's like there's a point in time where it transitions from nice to have to this is a must have for me. And you're right, there is usually that moment that exists.
And I think a lot of times marketers speak into this sense of building urgency. And I think if you're trying to create urgency, you're acknowledging that it doesn't exist. And probably the way to make this as easy for ourselves as marketers, as easy as possible, is to really think about what is that moment that they're searching for, right? We think about
Oh,
what's the product they're searching for, but really, what is the moment that they are trying to transition into or out of? They may be trying to transition into success, to have some sort of breakthrough, to have something start to go right. Or they might want to get rid of a thing that's been bothering them for a long time, like a chiropractor, right? Like, oh, my back's a little sore. Well, when it's really sore, you're going to need it, right?
Mhm.
And
yeah.
so it's more difficult to try and create that moment for somebody with a slightly sore back to get them to recognize this is the moment to get your back addressed so that it doesn't become sore. But they don't really have that pain point until that pain point becomes a top priority for them. And that's the opportunity we have, is to really think about the moments that they're searching for and speak to those.
So this is going to be a bad metaphor, but they did a really good job. So, for those listening, just don't cancel me for using these metaphors, right? But you look at like the cigarette industry, right? Like they actually did a good job because they started advertising the Camel cigarettes to the kids. And they did that knowing that it was illegal and the kids wouldn't be buying cigarettes in that time. But then there's going to be a moment, maybe when they want to look cool or whatever it is that, is driving that sort of behavior. When then that moment happens and that's when they choose to buy the cigarettes. But the advertising, the reason why I bring up this metaphor is the advertising happens long before that moment actually existed. And so when you understand that target market and your ideal customer profile, or we like to use the term super consumer profile, when you understand those profiles, then you understand roughly what needs to happen, what's the conversations going on in their head prior to the moment, so that when the moment happens, you're automatically on that short list, right? So there's sort of like there's the moment, but if you're going to win the moment, you got to win the pregame before you can win the game. So it's like there's two parts of it. And so the question now comes into play. All right, I get it. That makes complete logical sense. How do I find that moment with my market right now? And I know this conversation would be totally different if we had this 2 years ago, because
Mm.
2 years ago, you would have probably laid out about 3 months worth of work that would have had to have been done for somebody to actually accurately come up with that moment, which would have included a lot of surveys and maybe focus groups and all of that other jazz to do it correctly while eliminating the guesswork. However, we had a magic moment when you guys turned around and said, let me show you how we can find your moment. And when we get off the phone, I'll send you an email within an hour and you'll get your moment. And I'm going, what are you talking about here? And it was wild. So let's talk about that. So, how do people find their moment?
Yeah, I would say that to find the moment, it's about really deeply understanding your ideal client. And I love that you speak into super consumer, like who is the person that you're really meant to serve? And you're right. In the past, we would need to do months upon months of market research and interviewing and surveying and often hiring agencies to do this work for us and spending a lot of money. But now with having access to AI, we're able to tap into those insights so much faster and so much easier so that we can identify who is that buyer, who is that customer or client that's going to be the person that when that moment arrives, they're going to be ready to buy. So, Ken, if you want to share a little bit about how that works with AI, that would be awesome.
What we've really been focusing on is leaning into the intelligence side of AI. And I think the thing that people see when they first start working with AI is they look at its ability to generate words and content in a way that's more efficient than they've ever seen. And they're like, wow, this thing is really good at generating copy, because that's really the framework that people have had for what we do with computers, how we generate marketing. There's an abyss of opportunity that we see with AI where there is an infinite amount of intelligence that is completely untapped. And quite frankly, it's humbling to see how much more intelligent these computers can be than us, because they're trained on like 70 trillion different parameters that it can access at any point in time. So when we start to actually lean into the intelligence of AI and not simply use it as a task rabbit, where we're not asking it to do the things that we actually can already do, but start to ask it for insights and inferences and what does this mean to you? How could I do this? And start to use it to solve problems. As a problem solver, it's incredible. So what we did is we found what are the simplest inputs that we can come up with to infer as much detailed information as we can about a person. And really, all we need is what is their purpose and what is the outcome that they want for people. And with those two inputs, what we do is we start to ask it what information we can glean from those. And it looks at the inverse of what we're saying. So if we're saying that we're going to give somebody confidence, that means this person lacks confidence. And if they lack confidence, we can use that inference to start to infer different pain points. And with the pain points, we can infer different solutions. And from solutions, we get outcomes. So we get this cascade effect of taking a little bit of information on the front end, inferring from the inverse of it what this person needs, what they're interested in, what they value, and then unpacking that until after running a series of prompts like this, we can actually get a journal entry that will have this person expressing things to you that they wouldn't express to their closest colleagues and friends.
There's so much power and magic in what you just said. I'm going to unpack that for a moment because if our listeners understand what you just said right there, that could be a complete game changer. Most people will approach their marketing and their sales by saying, okay, you want this? Let me show you what's on the other side of getting it. Right. So it's all about you want this. Here's what's on the other side, all the rewards, the benefits, the money, the sex, all this other stuff that you're going to get as a result. But that actually doesn't drive the sale as much. And that's because most people believe that their situation is completely unique and they're different. And they get to that conclusion because they've tried to solve this once before, or in some cases, multiple times before. And they failed over and over again. Their life wasn't any better. Sometimes it even gets worse. Their business wasn't any better. Sometimes it gets worse. And so they're going to these websites, these sales presentations, these sales conversations with an overwhelming sense of skepticism. For those of you who know me, I paid Tony Robbins, between my wife and I, $250,000 to travel the world with him. Now, I did that because I was in a situation where I was just financially, I was doing well, but emotionally and my happiness and whatnot was really, really low. And I knew something had to change. And I'm sitting in the audience, I'm in the front row, and I'm waiting for Tony's presentation to get over with just so that I can meet him backstage and we can talk about my situation. And I'm almost looking at the 4 days that I was there as a waste of my time because I'm sitting there going, oh God, like let's just get through this dance and the song and the day, everything else. Let me just get through this so I can talk with Tony. And Tony starts the entire thing by saying, I want you to look in front of you, look behind you, look left and right. Chances are what's going through your mind right now is you're saying, these people all have the same problem, but my problem is different. And when he connected that message to the conversation going in my head, all of a sudden I realized I better pay attention because my problem in that moment connected with what he identified. And when we talk about winning the pre sales game is really connecting with the conversation that's going on in their head at that very moment. If you understand their pain, their worries, their concerns, where they're not confident, where they're uncertain, and whatnot, they will automatically come to the table and assume that you have the answer. And it's funny, I had this conversation with a client of mine several years ago. And when I had this conversation, he said, I don't believe this is true. My clients are different. And I'm going, oh my gosh, how many times do I have to hear this? Right. And so I said, let's stop for a minute. How much money have you already paid me? Now, at this point, it was either a quarter million or half a million. He had paid me over 1.5 million over our course of relationship together, somewhere around a quarter to half a million. He's like, I paid you a lot. I go, great. What do you know about me? He says, what do you mean? I go, what do you know about me? He goes, oh, shoot. I actually don't know anything about you. I said, wow, you've paid me a lot. You've paid me a lot of money to not know anything about me. Wouldn't you think that in order for you to buy, like by your philosophy, I would have had to sit there and tell you all about my awards and my press and my this and my that, but I didn't do that. But what did I do? And he said, you understood me. I go, I mean, understood you, but what do you mean? And he goes, you understood me better than anybody else. Heck, you were able to put things into words better than I could. And I said, and what did that do? And he goes, it put me completely at ease. And I knew with 100% confidence that you must have the solution. And I'm like, this is what we're talking about. That's the pregame part of the moment. When you get somebody so convinced that, oh, you're reading my mind. When it comes to the offer, you're not selling them anymore. All you're doing is you're pre-qualifying them, right? You're saying, all right, is this really the right fit? That's why all of this is so important, right? I love what you said about the inference of what caused it. Right now, there's so much uncertainty that's going in the market. Or let's go one step deeper. Let's look at B2B agencies, service providers. They're saying my pipeline is empty. There's too much feast and famine, lack of predictability in my pipeline. Most of the marketers out there, they're going out there saying, let me show you how to fill your pipeline. But Ken, you just said that that's not where you start. You're going to go and you're going to say, let's figure out why their pipeline is empty, right?
Yeah, it's really interesting because we started this out. I just wanted to find out if we could get demographic and psychographic information from unrelated inputs. And I was surprised it was able to do that. And so rather than just going straight down that rabbit hole, I went back to AI and said, how do you know this? What is it that allows you to have these inferences that we can't make? And what it came back with blew my mind. And it was a marketing philosophy that honestly didn't even exist. I got to the end of this and I was like, this is so great. Where can I read more? And it was like, we just came up with this. So what we found out was that everything comes down to the gaps people have, the gaps between where they're at and where they want to be. And the only way that we ever get satisfaction in life is by closing those gaps, which absolutely blew me away. So when we think about what outcome we want for somebody, if they want more money, that means they don't have enough money, right? And they want to close the gap of not enough money to getting enough money, and that satisfies them. Every
Mhm.
piece of satisfaction is about closing gaps. And so as we started to look into what can we learn about a person to satisfy these gaps, the one thing that everybody wants that isn't a pain point is validation. Validation is what everybody needs. And so when we think about, oh, what are their fears, their frustrations, all these things, that's fine. And we can create solutions for those. But what they really want is to be validated. They want to be heard, they want to be seen, and they want to feel that that gap is closed of I want to be seen, I want to be recognized. And that's a very easy gap for us to close if we listen and communicate effectively.
So when you say people need validation, and I agree with that gap. I mean, that's a whole premise behind sales. The moment you build the bridge between where they are and where they want to be, at the very moment that bridge is connected, the deal can be made. And that's a whole other conversation for another time. But the validation part, you said to be seen and to be heard. Go into that a little bit more. I mean, we're saying that most people aren't validating their prospects, and hence why their close rates aren't as good as they should be, or their lead rates aren't as good as they should be because they're not validating their prospects, right? So, what does that mean by like validation?
Well, if you don't give them validation, they're going to keep trying to prove themselves, right? They're going to repeat themselves. They're going to be stuck on a broken record of you don't see my problems. You don't hear me.
Mm,
You don't recognize me. So you need to acknowledge, yes, I do hear your problems and they're okay, right? And not diminish them and say, oh, don't worry, on the other side of this, that won't be a problem. Like, no, you don't understand. I am in this. Let me repeat it, right? And they're still stuck in that. And until you validate and go, man, that's really hard. I can only imagine what you're going through. I had something similar, but man, I my heart goes out to you.
Yeah.
Thank you, right? Now you're on the same page. And this is actually Amy's zone of genius. She's incredible with connecting with people this way.
I was gonna say, have you guys ever thought of becoming relationship counselors? Because, because I mean, I mean, honest to God, like when I have a conflict with my wife, it's because I jumped so quickly to the solution that she's like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa!
Yeah.
Did you hear me?"
Yeah, I really can relate to what you just said because it's about acknowledging the other person first. And this is something Ken and I geek out on all the time with communication. And often I'll say, like even beyond coaching entrepreneurs, helping entrepreneurs, I just love helping people with this piece because if more people got this piece, with every relationship in their life, then I really believe their relationships and their connections would be stronger.
Yeah.
And I see it all the time. So like even at a social gathering with a group of friends, if you notice how in a group, if a group conversation is happening and someone shares a story and the first thing the other person does is like hijack it and tell their story before acknowledging the other person's story, just watch this person's face kind of go like,
Yeah.
I don't know, like you were just waiting for your turn versus actually hearing my story about this trip I went on or what my child just went through or whatever. And so I noticed this, and Ken and I talk about this all the time. We talk about the spotlight, like who's the spotlight on, and give them the spotlight and comment on it, validate it, acknowledge it, say something about what they've said before you go to your thing. It's the same thing with an audience. It's the same thing with knowing your ideal client. So when I'm on a call with a potential client of mine, I focus so much on the listening. And beyond the listening, I validate them, I acknowledge them. I say things like, I hear you what you just said there. And said, like, wow, that must be really difficult. That's amazing that you were able to climb that mountain or whatever. Acknowledge them before you shift into your own thing. And they will feel so much better about the conversation and how they feel about you. So even when you were saying, Charles, about that client who said, like, wow, I know nothing about you, but I know that you get me. That is what I wish more people understood, is that if you can communicate with your ideal client or any relationship in your life that's important to you, that, hey, I see you, I get you, I'm here for you, I heard what you just said, I believe in you, they will feel so much closer to you and so much more drawn to you because you did that first. I could go on and on about this topic. It's something that lights me up a lot.
Amy, you're such a natural at this because even in what you just said, you took the time to validate what Charles said. You validated his story. And it's like the story you said. And I would bet that Charles had a feeling like, thank you. I actually now my story has more value. Even though he wasn't talking in that moment, you still shine some light on him. And one phrase that Amy and I have gotten a lot of use out of when people are upset and we're trying to solve a problem is they're just mad because they don't feel loved, right?
Mhm.
And Amy had somebody who was unhappy with something in business and she was trying to solve the problem. And it's like, they're just upset because they don't feel loved. I was like, oh, so let's make that person feel loved and validate them. And the problem disappeared. Suddenly, happy client. And it absolutely got rid of all of that. Validation is so important.
I know which client I'm talking about this years ago. This client went from asking for a refund out of being unhappy with team members and something that happened. I won't go into the weeds of that, to us having a call on Zoom, me really listening to her, understanding her, being loving and compassionate, just being in that energy and not being defensive. So it went from her asking for a refund to us collaborating on another project. I mean, that was like a
Mhm.
complete 180. And it would not have happened if I was caught up in my defensiveness and like, oh, we delivered everything we said we're going to deliver. We all, I think as entrepreneurs, we have those moments. And so it's like, hold on, let's listen to them. What can we do with that information and really focus on them and serve them and validate them and not make it about us and being defensive. And it was just wild to see where that conversation started and where it ended. So yes, it's powerful.
Well, it is called client relationships or customer relationships for a reason. We're not looking for transactions. If you want customer loyalty and retention, it's relationships plus results get you the retention, right? So you got to focus on the relationships when you're meeting with somebody and they're always trying to one up the conversations or just talk all about me, or this is what I did for this person and this is what I did for that person because you kind of disconnect from those. But you are right. How many times have we had conversations with other people before and they did all the talking. And then at the end, they're like, wow, this was an awesome conversation. Thank you. And I was like, I didn't get a freaking word in, but I'm glad you enjoyed it, you
Right.
know,
Yeah.
because they felt heard and they felt seen. I know we're pushing against the clock here. I want to dive a little bit deeper though, because you have leveraged so much AI in the work that you're doing now. And you talked about how you're using AI not only to understand what they want, but then back it up and the inference and what caused it. And that's so brilliant. I loved that you went back and you asked her, well, how do you know this? Because, that part is really cool. So let's go deeper into the more of how you're using AI into this discussion. I'm totally geeking out over this. This is great. I love when I have podcast guests and I have a notebook next to me and I'm taking notes while we're talking. I just think that's super cool.
Yeah, definitely. Well, as Ken mentioned, once we started to really tap into the intelligence to better understand, initially in our business, to understand my ideal client, then we realized, wow, we can gain so much insight based on such little information. And now, once we have this information, that we can use this we call it an ideal client handbook that goes so deep into the emotional needs, the gaps, the customer journey, the ideal customer journey, their fears and frustrations and aspirations, but how they would say it in their own words. And it's not even just what they would say, but what is it that they're not saying that they're thinking. So once we
Mhm.
have this information, then we can use that as an input back into ChatGPT or Claude or whatever language model you're using to say, this is who my ideal client is on the deepest level. And then
Yeah.
have a conversation with it to based on whatever it is you're working on. So initially, I think a lot of entrepreneurs and businesses are like, here's brief description of my ideal client, write this copy for this thing that I have coming up or for this web page or landing page or whatever they're creating, instead of having a conversation with it and tapping into the intelligence and saying, hey, let's brainstorm some ideas of themes of content that we come up with that would be relevant and engaging for my ideal client. So we've been using it by uploading the ideal client handbook into ChatGPT or Claude and then having those conversations and then having it create for us versus just jumping straight to that end result that might not be as good if we don't do these initial steps. We're using it so many other ways. We've been now like building out some other AI projects, but that's one of the ways that we use it.
You asked me a few questions about our super consumer, and then I answered them very quickly. And then you turned around and gave me, I think it was a 27-page breakdown of our ideal client. And I use that when I'm building out different prompts or when I'm doing some brainstorming or whatever that might be, or when I'm building a GPT, I'll turn around and I'll just say, read this document so that it fully understands the super consumer. And now that we have baseline understanding, now we can turn around and we can work from there. There's been many benefits to what you provided me, but that is right up there as one of the top use cases anyway for me. It was great.
Yeah, I think that's one of the really interesting things is people are so self-absorbed that when they want ChatGPT to obey them, they're like, "Well, you have to understand how I think. You have to understand how I talk." They get all wrapped up in like, "You have to represent me." And this actually is thinking about, well, who is your message for? And how much attention have we given where this is going to land? You don't even matter that much in this conversation because when this person reads it, it's between them and your message, right?
Yeah.
And you're so concerned about yourself that you're not really figuring out what it is that is of interest to them. And one unpopular opinion I have about ideal client, the first thing everybody does is their eyes go straight to the age. What is the age demographic? What's the age
Right.
range? It's 45 to 50. Oh, that's not true. I have clients that are 30. I have clients that are 60. This whole thing is wrong. It doesn't matter. Honestly, like the age is something that's supposed to inform your own stereotypes, your own biases about, oh, old people feel this way. But if we skip past that and go straight to what their pain points are, if the pain point is the same for a 20-year-old or a 60-year-old, it really doesn't matter what number you
Yeah.
slap on them, right? So I keep that information there because I think people feel like an ideal client assessment would be incomplete without that. But it's
Yeah.
such a superficial, worthless measure of what a
Sure.
person believes when we can get so much deeper. We can get all of the inferences of age without having to share that. It really doesn't help us as much as we think it does.
I thought it was interesting that you're like, and when you're between the ages of like 45 and 55, like you're old. I'm like, wait a minute, where's that put me in? No, I'm just kidding. No, but I mean, you're spot on right there. I think all of that is really true. Let's take a step back for a minute. Where this is a Beyond Seven Figures podcast, I'm going to have both of you answer independently. What would you say is your biggest, best tip for those listeners who want to take their company beyond seven figures? And ladies first.
Ladies first. I would say that ultimately it's about being authentic to who you are and who you want to serve. And so if you think about your own journey in your life, in your career, and your experiences, if you're building and scaling a business, I really believe that one of the most important things is being true to who you are and how you want to approach business, and also
Mhm.
being true to who you really want to serve and not just who can I get as a client? Like, who do I think will pay for the services or opportunities or products, whatever it is that I offer? Because at the end of the day, if you're not clear and confident about who you are and who you want to serve, then you'll be influenced by others who are successful and you're like, oh, that person's successful. So I'll follow exactly how they've done it. Now, if you resonate with them and you have, similar values and there's certain things that you love, then great, then be influenced by them. But if you are just being influenced by their success versus how you really want to show up as an entrepreneur, then you'll end up following these different paths and becoming something like, can I talk about as a second rate version of somebody else versus becoming a first rate version of yourself. So I
Mm,
definitely have been that person who's like, oh, well, I kind of want to be like that person and follow their lead and even invest in their coaching. But what worked for them didn't work for me. But then when I thought about what do I really want and who do I really want to work with, which has evolved over time, then I've been able to create the offerings, the events, the retreats, the AI products at this point. I definitely had an evolution over the years. And I'm not just fulfilled with the revenue in my business, but I'm fulfilled on a daily basis as far as what I'm doing, who I'm connecting with, who I'm serving, who I work with as team members. And so it just makes for a more enriched experience than if I was just
mm,
taking this cookie cutter approach of, oh, do this, do this, do this, do this, and you'll scale past like seven figures. Like, well, that worked for you, but that doesn't align with me. And I want to also bring my own strengths, my own gifts to the table. Otherwise, I feel like the very reason why I became an entrepreneur in the first place is set aside. I wanted to create that freedom to be expressed as my authentic self and to really create the life that I want. So be true to who you are and be honest with yourself about who you want to work with. And life and business will be so much more fun and fulfilling. So that's what I
I
would say.
love it.
Yeah.
And Ken, your biggest best tip.
I'm going to take it a completely different direction than Amy did because I'm deep down the rabbit hole of AI. And ChatGPT came out about a year and a half ago and took the world by storm. I mean, AI had been around, but that was when it really introduced itself to the masses. And I think for people that were doing all right without AI, they're like, oh, I'll come back to this later. It's a passing trend. And as it has spun out of control and it keeps getting bigger and deeper and it's infiltrating everything, I think there's a second wave now that people are saying, geez, I missed the boat. And
Yeah.
the truth is, it's still early to get in on AI. Like you have not missed it, but the time is passing, right? It's not too late, but time is running out. So we're
Yeah.
still in this phase where you can be on the front end of AI if you get in on it now. But if it runs away and you're trying to catch up with it later, the gap is going to get really wide. And I think we're going to have to do a lot of recovery efforts to try. And it would be like saying you're not going to adopt the internet. Like, okay, that's fine in 1995. It's okay in 1996. But if it's 1997 and you're still licking stamps, it's time to get with the times. Your business is passing you by.
Yeah, completely right. Speed is a competitive advantage. And we talked earlier when we started this conversation to get the same amount of information that you're able to pull up in a matter of seconds would have traditionally taken months. And then from that months, we're going to have to like pull and dissect and interpret that information. And there's going to be a lot of variation depending on who the person is that's reading and trying to interpret that information because they're going to layer on their own bias on top of that. You've got then Chat GPT that, or any AI. I'm sure you guys have probably using a lot of Claude right now because it's, pretty phenomenal tool and Gemini and all these other ones, right? But, now you're able to look at a tool that is, again, bring it to you in seconds. We talk about AI and the importance of AI. Well, clarity equals power. And so not only are you able to get information faster, but when you have that clarity, you can make better decisions. And we're all where we are today because of the decisions and the quality of the decisions that we made. So that is a huge factor. And when we look at today, it's all about meeting our clients' needs. But tomorrow it gets a little more complicated because our clients are going to be expecting us to anticipate their needs even before they have them. And so that's where AI comes into place because previous to AI, we weren't able to gather that information in the same way. But now, because of AI, the demands are going to continue to grow and we're going to be forced to anticipate their needs and anticipate trends and anticipate all this other stuff, disruptions and so forth. So, really important. Now, people want to learn more about you and the work that you do. If they want to get one of these profiles for themselves, where do we send them?
Yeah. I'd say to go to idealclient.ai. And it has a lot of information resources on connecting with your ideal client, your ideal customer, and also has our signature ideal client handbook on there as well, and a chance to connect with us as well. We'd love that.
Yeah, and I've mentioned I brought these guys on not only because they're great friends and thought partners, but I had the experience of working with that ideal client handbook, and it's something that I use on a pretty regular basis. Great, great, great tool. I don't recommend anything that I don't try myself, and it's something that I've tried and I found a massive value in it. So again, that's idealclient.ai. So for additional tips, strategies, and information to take your business beyond seven figures, also check us out at predictableprofits.com. Again, that's predictableprofits.com. This is Charles Godet with my friends, Amy Yamada and Ken Dro without the Z. Ken Dro without the
Well
Z.
done. Thank you.
That wraps up today's episode, and I will see you in another one. Take care.